Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith takes a look at corn and soybean markets as we enter November. Ernie Goss describes the health of the rural Midwest economy. Stephen Wegulo talks about the condition of Nebraska's winter wheat. And Azadine Azam explains how China became a major player in buying U.S. ag goods. Roy Smith is our marketing analyst this week. With the November crop report looming on November 8th, the latest progress report shows U.S. farmers have harvested 77% of their soybeans and 59% of their corn. Nebraska has combined 94% of its beans, which trails only Louisiana for the progress among the top 18 soybean-producing states. We started our interview with Roy by asking for an update on harvest progress in his area of Cass County, Nebraska.
My personal farm, we finished harvest about a week ago and got the corn and beans out in good shape, so pretty happy about that. I'm still helping the neighbor with a little bit of harvest, driving trucks and so forth, but it's slowing down gradually.
Just enough to earn your supper, huh?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, Monday was a bad day for beans. We'll start in soybeans. Monday was a rough day. What's your sense right now overall on beans as you look at both cash and then that nearby contract?
Monday's action was really disappointing. As you know, I watched the dead cat bounce and watched that harvest low, and we got a real distinct harvest low the 1st of October. I mean, you look at the chart and it's hard to miss it, and the market gradually starts working its way up now. Then it took a little hiatus and backed down and went back almost to the harvest low and then came back again. And we were a few cents short of my target where I would normally start selling cash beans, and unfortunately lost 29 cents in the cash market. So now we're back to counting days again.
Which means what going forward?
Well, we would hope that we could get back to that level where we broke down from early part of this week, but you know, there's no guarantee. I'd say that I've seen this happen many, many times, and the odds are good that we're going to get a little bit of a rebound yet. However, we have a crop report coming out on the 8th of November, and I think everybody needs to be aware of that. I'm not so sure, but what the huge crop that's coming isn't already bid into the price, but it's just a real sensitive time right now.
Yeah, I'll ask you about that crop report towards the close. You were mentioning in your article on agriculture.com that I was reading there's a big spread between now and soybeans and once you get into spring.
Right, I call that the bull spread, or bull spreading. Has nothing to do with rumors at the cafe or anything like that, but the fact that nearby futures are higher than deferred futures, so we call that a bull spread, because that usually is an indication that the processing plants want your soybeans now as opposed to next spring, and so they're paying a premium to get them now while we're still waiting on the South American crop. That really, first of all, that's one of the factors that's involved in the dead cat bounce, but it really gives farmers an opportunity to get those beans sold and cashed in before spring comes around.
I'll move to corn before asking you about next week's report. Is there a chance, is there a likely chance that corn could dip below that $4 mark?
It all depends on how the trade interprets this report that's coming out the 8th of November. Yes, there's always a chance. I have to think that less than $4, the corn is a pretty good buy for people that need it to feed hogs and cattle. But we've got quite a bit of harvest left, and there's always a chance that we'll maybe run past the logical price floor that we'd like to see, and then later on when the harvest is over and the bin doors are locked, get some kind of a rebound.
I'll ask you about basis in this area of Nebraska for both corn and soybeans. What does basis look like?
I'm a little disappointed that we haven't seen any response in basis on the soybeans. Usually when we get towards the end of harvest, we start seeing the basis or improve, but it hasn't happened this year, at least not to any great extent, and they seem to be putting their money in the cash bid as opposed to the basis. And so that's one of the things I look at in confirmation of a dead cat bounce is when the basis is narrow and it starts getting wider. Well, we haven't seen it narrow yet, so it's pretty much been steady, I guess, for several months.
All right, now the one that'll get the headlines. The November crop report comes out next Friday. It's the first crop report since really before harvest began in September. How do you recommend protecting yourself around this report?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do. The simplest is to make some cash sales next week before the report comes out. In fact, I'll be looking to maybe make some sales of soybeans that are already in the elevator and cash in that way. You can use futures. If you're short futures already with hedges on, I say leave them on and hope for the basis to improve. I looked at the options premiums. They're still pretty stiff, and most people don't want to pay very much to get that guarantee, so options are always a possibility, but if you've never done it before, go real slow and be sure you understand the strategy.
Next week, we'll look at cattle and hog markets with UNL Extension livestock economist Kate Brooks. As a reminder, Friday, November 8th is the scheduled release date for the November crop report. The release time of 11 a.m. Central will be after our taping for the show, but Elaine Cubb will join us when the USDA puts out its projections. That interview will be available on our website. If you're a regular viewer of this show, which we know you are, you've probably heard us cite the Rural Mainstreet Index. The monthly report surveys bank presidents and CEOs in rural, agriculturally dependent areas in a 10-state region about economic conditions in their communities. The survey focuses on approximately 200 rural towns with an average population of 1,300 residents. This month's Rural Mainstreet Index rose for the first time since June. Creighton University economist Ernie Goss is an author of the study and joined us Monday to discuss the results. We asked Ernie about farmland prices, equipment sales, and how this point in 2013 compares to the same time period of last year.
I'd say, Jeff, okay, and I know that's not a good precise term, but what we're seeing, Jeff, according to our survey of bank CEOs in rural areas of 10 states, including Nebraska, the overall number is treading around softer growth. The agricultural economy is just not growing as fast now as it was this time last year. Of course, we're seeing agricultural commodity prices down fairly significantly. Of course, that's playing into the numbers. And also, of course, lots of things coming out of Washington or not coming out of Washington having some effects on what we call the rural Main Street economy.
As you look at the Fed stimulus policy and the QE3 that they're in right now, how does that relate to agriculture, interest rates, and commodity prices overall?
Boy, Jeff, that's significant. I mean, in other words, the Federal Reserve has had the pedal to the metal, so to speak. They spewed out, I'll use that term, technical term, spewed out $3.5 trillion in additional bank funding by buying bonds. And of course what that's done is weakened the dollar, and it's tended to push up agricultural commodity prices But what we've seen recently, despite all that stimulus from the federal government and from the Fed, agricultural commodity prices have softened quite significantly this year, and certainly in the last few months. And some of that's just coming from a slower growth from some of our trading partners and slower U.S. growth as well.
So I'm hearing, and what I'm hearing from a lot of farmers is that there's a lot less grain sold now as it compares to where normally they would be. Do you think that's a dangerous position to be in, or is that okay?
Well, I think a lot of, now we asked that question as well from the bank CEOs about holding grain aside, and some of the farmers are in fact storing grain, waiting on some better prices. That's a risky strategy because it looks like agricultural commodity prices could head even lower. So in terms of overall ag income, it's going to be down this year from last year. And when we look at Nebraska, particularly Nebraska and South Dakota, where we had that significant snowstorm for October, that of course had some dramatic impacts on the livestock producers, particularly in South Dakota and western Nebraska as well, with the killing of cattle there from the snowstorm, and that'll spill over into the agricultural or the rural Main Street economy.
For those crop growers, one of the big input prices they've had to deal with is farm prices and the rising of those farm prices. Now, your index declined for the 9th time in 10 surveys. Is that an indication at all that we might have reached a peak?
Well, I think, Jeff, what it's showing is some of the errors coming out of that farm land price bubble. For example, 6 months ago, we asked the bankers about looking ahead for cash rents, the price that farmers pay to rent farmland. They indicated for the next year it will grow by 9.5%. We asked the same question this month, 2.5%. So we've gone from 9.5% expected growth to 2.5% expected growth in cash rent. So clearly, air is coming out of that farmland price bubble, and that's not such a bad thing. I think we were growing farmland prices at a pace that was unsustainable, so that's not such a bad thing.
Tell me where the equipment, the machinery, the large purchases, the big ticket items are, and what that could be a point of.
You know, Jeff, we've now recorded 3 straight months where bankers, the bank CEOs have reported pullbacks in purchases of agricultural equipment. And we're seeing that across the region. Farmers, as a result of less economic confidence, pulling back on their purchases of agricultural equipment, but also they've also purchased and done a lot of purchasing over the last several years, and of course they now have the equipment they need. So we've definitely seen a slowdown, much like farmland prices. We've seen agricultural equipment sales slowing down, in fact now negative for the last 3 months.
From your survey, can you gain an indication of if the lack of a farm bill has had any impact on the confidence of rural America?
Absolutely, Jeff. That's one of the things coming from the bankers saying we need a farm bill, the certainty from a farm bill that's not temporary, that's not year to year, but 5 years out, say, and that's having some impacts. We asked the bankers about what they would recommend for a farm bill. One thing that comes through clearly from the bank CEOs, they would like to see a separation of the food stamp program or the SNAP program from the farm programs, but that's probably not going to happen. It looks like, as I see it, Congress is going to have a farm bill where those two are together going forward, and that of course is done not necessarily to have a good farm bill, it's actually to get votes, and that's what we're going to likely see.
I'll ask you a 2-part question to close out here. How do you see 2013 ending and going into 2014? And the second part is, what can farmers watch for signs that the economy might be headed one way or the other?
I think, Jeff, we're going to continue to see the agricultural interest, the rural Main Street economy, the economy based upon agriculture, dependent on agriculture, slowing down somewhat. It's still going to be growing at a positive pace, but that pace is well down from this time next year. Going forward, I think certainly what farmers need to watch for and what community leaders in these rural areas of Nebraska and the other 9 states that we survey need to be watching out for what the Fed does, the Federal Reserve, and what happens to interest rates. If we see interest rates heading higher, that would certainly cut into agricultural interests, we would see some pullbacks then, certainly in terms of agricultural equipment sales, but also in farmland prices. So keep an eye on long-term interest rates going forward. They've come down recently. That's a pretty good signal for agriculture, but going forward, that's the real key, is what happens to interest rates and how that affects, of course, agricultural commodity prices and the overall economy.
And Wednesday, the U.S. Federal Reserve announced it would maintain its $85 billion monthly bond buying stimulus program. In related news when it comes to land prices, next week we'll talk with UNL Extension educator Alan Vanalik about a series of tenant-landlord workshops aimed at developing appropriate leasing agreements in Nebraska. Nebraska's winter wheat is rated 72% good to excellent, with 94% of the crop emerged. The conditions as a whole are better than a year ago. The latest UNL drought monitor shows Nebraska held steady with last week's model, as 13% of the state is no longer in drought classification. The ratings for October 30th, 2012 listed 100% of the state in drought, with 95% in the worst two categories. This week we asked UNL Extension plant pathologist Stephen Wegulo to give us an overview of current growing conditions and the possible disease outlook for Nebraska's winter wheat crop.
We have had more rain than last year, and as far as wheat is concerned, the rain sometimes favors root and crown rot diseases, and so you may see fields that have bare patches where germination was just not even, and that usually will be due to soil-borne fungi such as Fusarium, Bipolaris, and Pythium. Right now it's too late to do anything because planting is done already, but for next year we can take care of those problems quite easily by treating seed with fungicide before planting. If the winter turns out to be mild, and this we don't know, but if it turns out to be mild, some diseases such as leaf rust might overwinter. In fact, just last week, leaf rust was seen on winter wheat in Kansas, in two locations in Kansas. So if it overwinters, and then that means next year it could start early and cause more damage. And so producers should go out and start scouting very early in the spring.
For information during the winter wheat growing season, you can check for the latest news on the CropWatch website at cropwatch.unl.edu. A recent UNL Cornhusker Economics article details how China's changing diet towards higher meat consumption has helped U.S. corn and soybean production. But the report also points out more natural resources will be needed to produce even more output. Authored by Azadine Azam and Sarah Raykamp, the article is part of a larger project from UNL's Ag Econ department focused on sustainable consumption. It's partly aimed at helping consumers be more aware of the composition of their diets. As we said when we visited the country in June of last year, China is exceptionally important to U.S. agriculture. Part of the rise is due to China's people making more money and developing appetites for more meat. This UNL research says total Chinese pork consumption has outpaced the U.S. since the mid-1970s and was 6 times higher in 2012, with the average person in China eating 27 pounds of pork more than the average American. As you'll hear, this changing food demand in the world's most populous country puts an emphasis on both production and efficiency in the U.S.
Chinese diet mix conforms to something that we refer to as Bennetts Law. What Bennetts Law said is that as countries get wealthier over time, what they do, they change the mix of their diet from a diet that is dominated plant-based to a diet that has more variety, and usually it is meat-based. So if you look at China's income, let's say in 1980 it was around $193 or $200. Now we're talking about $6,000. So during that period of time, if you look at the graphs in the article, what you see is that there is a change in the composition of the diet of the Chinese. Now, meat as a proportion of total calories is about 22%, which compares to about 27% in the United States.
And that makes a huge implication for
when you look at importing grains from
Absolutely.
the U.S., from the South. How important is China to U.S. soybean production, and could it become that important for U.S. corn production?
Well, based on the figures we know now, we know that China imports about 60% of all the soybeans in the world and about 25% of all the soybeans of the United States. So that is very crucial for their animal production. Having said that, there are also competitors that would like to get into the U.S., in the Chinese market as far as soybean exports.
As big as China is right now to soybean production and what role it plays in corn, could it become even bigger, do you feel?
You know, projections are projections, yes. I mean, if we go by Bennetts Law, and these laws are not inviolable, but to use as a guideline, is that as China gets richer, the diet composition is going to change. You know, so the question, do they have enough land? Do they have enough resources to meet the feed grain? You know, you should realize, I mean, you realize that China is surpasses the United States as feed grain production, but that's still not enough to feed their own animals. By the way, including aquaculture, because they also feed fish. So all these soybean products are very important for them.
So part of your report is looking at how it can be a mixed blessing, and obviously with China's demand for soybeans, that puts a tighter supply, kind of like the U.S. is seeing with a tighter cattle supply. That leads to higher prices in the stores, and that's part of what you're looking at as well, too, right?
Yeah. The idea is that as demand increases for soybeans, somebody has to produce them. Now, the mixed blessing, farmers will do very well, but it is going to put some stress on some of the natural resources that are required to produce that. Now, I want to make an addendum on this so people don't misunderstand when it comes to water. I really understand that a large proportion of corn and soybeans in the United States is rain-fed, okay? I think the figures that have been mentioned to me is that about only 12 to 16% of corn is irrigated in the United States and probably 8 to 9% in soybeans. So the fact that a large proportion of corn and soybeans are rain-fed, I don't want people to misunderstand that that's what I mean by stress and water. Because you come to our state, a large proportion of that corn is being irrigated. So the stress is going to be really location specific, and this is what I'm really referring to.
Our full interview with Azzedine is available on our website. The need for more corn or soybeans under water requirements obviously places a great need for technological advancements and efficiency in agriculture. The Boston Consulting Group estimates between 2007 and 2012, water consumption grew 55% for U.S. corn production and 17% for U.S. soybean production. Years of research on weed flaming in Nebraska has led to the design and manufacturing of new field equipment to control weeds. In the November Nebraska Farmer, you can read an article from Kurt Arns on the development of commercial weed flaming rigs, jointly developed by University of Nebraska-Lincoln scientists and Agricultural Flaming Innovations. The Propane Education and Research Council has been involved in helping conduct the research. First models of the flaming equipment will be ready for the 2014 growing season. You can read more about flame weeding in the November Nebraska Farmer. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main forecast, let's take a look back at this last week. And we had talked about this upper level trough moving out of the northern Rockies and then diving into the Central Plains. That's primarily what happened during this last week, although it did dig a little bit deeper toward the south, and hence our precipitation output that was generated by the models didn't really verify to the extent that it was initially forecasted. Whereas we were expecting 1 to 1.5 inch broad base across the eastern third of the state, really it had to get down to the southeast corner to get that much moisture, as the vast majority of that precipitation fell across a good portion of eastern Kansas and then points southward. So the convection actually robbed the moisture being transported toward the north. And in the northwest, we did see some light snow and freezing rain, but no significant accumulation. So overall, with this warm weather coming in this weekend, I would think that we'll have some fairly decent weather, at least for a couple days, to get back out in the fields and do some corn harvest. Unfortunately, once again, another storm system enters the picture as we go into next week and has the potential to generate a little bit of light moisture around the region. but right now it doesn't look like it's going to be a significant event for the vast majority of the state. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week will progress. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is the trough responsible for all of our inclement weather and cool conditions during the midweek period has now shifted toward the east, and when in its place we're seeing ridging building, and it's going to strengthen as this trough in the west starts to dig into the central Rockies. So we have a couple nice days in front of us. The warmest day is probably going to be tomorrow as we get the southwest flow aloft. That's going to bring some southerly winds. And as this trough builds in, it's moving fast enough that it's not going to have enough time to bring a significant slug of moisture into our region. So we are expecting clouds to start increasing late Sunday in the western part of the state. And by the time we get to Monday, this trough will start to dig a little bit deeper, and we'll start to see the clouds overrun the state. And the surface cold front will start entering Monday night into the northwestern part of the state, so we'll start to see a rather sharp cool down, but the warmer temperature will remain in place across southeast Nebraska probably into Tuesday and possibly into even Wednesday. But as this trough deepens, all the moisture from the Gulf is going to be shunted for the most part to the east of us. So there is energy here. It will generate the potential for some light precipitation. But as we get on the back side of this system, particularly on Wednesday, we might actually even generate a little bit of light snow, and we could see some accumulations from northeast Nebraska through central Nebraska, and maybe just a mix of rain and snow in eastern Nebraska, particularly during the overnight hours. By the time we get to Thursday, that system just takes off toward the northeast, and we see yet another trough starting to build into the western United States, and that should help build our temperatures as we move into the later part of the week. And once again, we see that trough building and the ridge in front of it bringing up that warm air, so we'll rebound rather dramatically in terms of temperature. So here's the forecast for the next 5 days. You'll notice that we'll see some nice warm temperatures, that increasing chance of precipitation during the midweek with cool conditions, and then a gradual warm up as we move toward the end of the week. Now as we go into the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday through following Tuesday, we'll notice that we're right here in the normal range in terms of precipitation. Shows below normal, but with that storm system coming in, I think this may be underplayed in regards to the precipitation forecast.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Roy Smith, Ernie Goss, Stephen Wegulo, and Azadine Azam are available individually on our website and through the Market Journal mobile app as part of the November 1st episode. Next week, Kate Brooks will be our livestock marketing analyst, and Alan Van Nollik will discuss how tenants and landlords can develop a fair agreement when leasing ag land. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.